Maybe now I think it would be a good time to introduce the concept of the electromagnetic spectrum as it relates to astronomical observations and sort of which sorts of bodies emit which sorts of radiation to what degrees.
Mm-hmm. My goodness. Well, that's a wide open category too. Maybe some stories to tell. Maybe it's useful to tell our listeners about how it was recognized that light is electromagnetic radiation. So back in the late 1800s, we were beginning to get the equations of electromagnetism. And we knew that an electric field changing could produce a magnetic field. And we knew that a magnetic field changing could produce an electric field. And so we had those equations, differential equations that were written out. Now, a few people could understand them at the time. And there was a remarkable surprise in those equations because there was a solution to the equations that said something can propagate as a wave, electromagnetic wave propagating at a certain speed, which you can calculate from the constants of how much particles attract each other magnetically or electrically. So, golly gee, it immediately jumped out that when we had those equations, then light waves have the same speed as what's predicted in there. So maybe they are electromagnetic waves. So late 1800s, I forget the exact date. And then that came around again to be really important to Einstein because when he looked at that and he saw, well, actually, you can measure the speed of light and calculate the speed of light in a laboratory without having to move. And then when you imagine, what if I made a measurement in a moving train? Would I get the same answer if I had windows closed so I didn't know I was moving? The answer would be yes. Well, what if you get the same answer that way? Which led him to relativity. So big jump in concept. And from there we said, oh, well, then space and time aren't even absolute. So what a huge shock that we got in just a few decades, going from discovering that light's an electromagnetic wave to space and time aren't what we thought. Whoa. Anyway, so then we come back to say, oh, well, what about kinds of waves do we have? And so the electromagnetic waves basically are all the same, except the only difference is how long are the waves? What's the difference between the peaks? And so the waves you can see with your eye, there are about 2 million of them per meter. So really tiny. You can't see the wavelength yourself. The waves that we pick up from the cosmos, from the early universe, they're about 1 millimeter long. The waves you pick up with your radio are about 1 meter long or a few meters long. So that's on the longer side. Then on the shorter side, we get to X-rays and gamma rays, which are all the same phenomenon, just differing in wavelength. So that's a quick rundown on electromagnetic waves for our listeners. And then we can go on to the mysteries that they tell us about.
Yeah, sure. Well, first, I think, again, it's just worth noting that just about everything we've discussed relating to observation so far is dependent upon these features of electromagnetic waves. So that the distance between the peaks is longer for the more distant galaxies, the redshift, is what allowed Hubble to conclude that they're speeding away from us more quickly than the nearer galaxies. Mm-hmm. And one last question about the history is, you already mentioned Penzias and Wilson discovering the cosmic microwave background, but as I recall, it was very serendipitous. It was a funny story from when they were at Bell Labs. Do you remember just how this unfolded?
Yeah, I wasn't there at the time, but the story has been told many times. There was a group of people at Princeton who were looking intentionally for this radiation, and they were building their equipment. And then there was a traveling astronomer named Bernie Burke who knew both groups. So he knew about the work at Princeton, and then he went to visit his friends at Bell Labs. And they said, I see that you've found something with your equipment here at Bell Labs. This is what it could be. You should talk to those people over at Princeton. So they did. So the upshot was the leader of the group at Princeton had to announce to his buddies, boys, we've been scooped. And eventually they both published their results in the same issue of the Astrophysical Journal. But the people who had discovered it already the first time were the ones who got the Nobel Prize for it. And they did good work. They should.